Welcome back. So we're on Friday of this week. So we're going to be wrapping up these 5 assumptions that we need to question so that we can get better. Because we want to discern between what is fact and what's fiction on these assumptions that just sort of undergird a lot of decisions that we make and a lot of the path that we choose to walk down just by default in many ways. So it's really important to look at these. And remember, these 5 assumptions come off of 5 symptoms that we looked at last week. All right, now yesterday we looked at the false assumption that keeps us perpetually wound too tight. And that assumption is our inner pronouncement that I'm not safe if I'm not on guard all the time. And you can go back to yesterday. Boy, we unpacked a lot having to do with that one. But today we're going to be talking about the false assumption that causes us to quietly and a lot of times secretly feel distrustful toward God. And that assumption is that God let me down. This is a big one, Wendy. We hear a lot of women talking about this, and they really truly struggle with this because there's like this inner disconnect going on inside of them, because on one hand, they love God, but at the same time, they feel like I've been through all this. Why didn't God protect me from this? Why didn't God block this person from being in my life? Why did God let this happen? So what would you have to say about this assumption that God let me down?
The first thing is that it's a bigger topic than we can cover here in so many ways. We're not theologians, right? And the second is that a lot of us, especially if you've got any type of abuse in your background, we can walk around saying, well, if I were all powerful and I were all good, I would have never let a child, a woman, fill in the blank with whatever, have to go through that, right? And so maybe God isn't as good as I think he is, or maybe God isn't as powerful as I think he is, or maybe God just doesn't care about me. And so there's so many things wrapped up in this that it's a huge topic. So we are just going to be like life coachy practical with this, and just give you some things to look at and some things to try, first of all. And the theology is worth wrestling with. Who you believe God is, what you believe he's like, who you think you are, questions worth wrestling with. But for the down-to-earth practicalities, which is all we're dealing with here, is when you embrace this assumption, like you said, it leads to all types of negative consequences. So, and you don't have to realize this you can just start living these without thinking about it. The first, like we've been talking about a little bit, is you're not really loved by God. You're not really important to God. And so he doesn't really care what happens to you. That is a really painful way to live, feeling like God doesn't love you. The other thing is that God is holding out on you. God is all powerful and all loving, and he could have protected you or could be giving you things right now to make this easier, but he's not.
And
So
isn't that the same belief that caused Eve to fall in the garden?
that
God's holding out. So
yes,
if I and eat this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that is what the snake, the serpent, Satan, caused her to believe. That's God must be holding out on you, to withhold this information, this knowledge from you. And I mean, we all know where that led us today.
Well,
Not
that led to
anything
her taking matters into her own hands and saying, well, God obviously isn't good, and or isn't who I thought he was. And so I'm going to take matters into my own hands. I'm going to pick this, I'm going to eat it, and then I'm going to share. Right. And so when you do that, you're stepping out of God's will for your life and opening the doors to all kinds of things. Whenever you live in untruth, you open yourself up to all kinds of things. And so this one, though, this is really hard. It's really hard for a Christian and someone who wants to love God and who does trust God in some way, shape, or form to have these thoughts and entertain these really deep-seated hurts. And they hurt.
And we have a spiritual enemy that prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking to devour. And so when we're wrestling with these things, God doesn't have a problem with you wrestling with him.
No.
He wants you to come to him with these things. I mean, he says he'd rather us be hot or cold, right? we can still be going to church, we can still be
Yeah.
serving, we can still be doing the right things, but you know when
Mm-hmm.
God doesn't have your whole heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're talking about here. There's parts of our heart that we're holding aside. And whenever we do that, that can give the enemy, our spiritual enemy, toeholds
Mm-hmm.
to set up strongholds to try to, I mean, his goal is to separate us from God, right? So
Yeah.
we don't even realize all the times that he's planting seeds of doubt in our mind. And when we grab a hold of those, when we come into agreement with this, then we are coming out from the Lord's covering. And we are opening ourselves up to be attacked in greater and greater ways.
Yeah.
You know, it's
When
just
you
it's a bad path.
we let people speak into our lives. We let ideas speak into our lives. And then, like you just said, they plant seeds, they take root, and they produce fruit. And some fruit is bitter and dangerous, and some fruit
Mm-hmm.
is healthy and nourishing. And the
Mm-hmm.
goal is to pull out things that are bitter and dangerous and to nurture things that are healthy and nurturing. And so,
Mm-hmm.
again, just the practicalities of some of the things we're saying is the first step is just to stop and go, okay, is it possible I'm misunderstanding something?
Right.
Is it possible I'm believing something that might not be true? Is it
Right.
possible
Because we
I'm
don't know the
thinking,
beginning from the end. We don't see the full picture. So
yeah,
is it possible we're misunderstanding? It's
hmm
not just possible, it's highly probable.
yeah. And it's also possible that Job went through a lot and he hadn't done anything wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to speak, like he was sought out because he was a righteous person doing the right things. And Satan was saying to God, well, of course he loves you because you've given him everything. And I obviously do not know everyone's situations and can't say, oh, no, you did everything right. You're just being tested like Job was being tested.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know. But we do know that God's character is trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
So, first step is always to go, okay, so what am I believing about God and what am I believing about myself?
And then we can ask ourselves another question with this too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what would happen if I stopped asking why of God? Because I mean, that's like the first, like, why God? Why did you,
Mm-hmm.
and that does never, it never yields us answers that we're looking for. What if we stopped doing that and instead just simply came to him and offered up our broken heart to him? What would happen if we did
Mm-hmm.
that? We can be pretty sure what happens because he talks about it in his word about how he heals the broken hearts.
Mm-hmm.
So what if we just came to him and offered up our broken heart? And it's been my experience for myself and for others that in the process of doing that, sometimes our whys get answered
Mm-hmm. And
and
sometimes they
sometimes
don't.
they don't. But yeah, but in times when we don't get an answer of why, we know that if we stay in this spot, we will go backwards. We will not go forward in the ways we need to. And we have to ask ourselves too, do we believe that he's good? Whether we understand everything or not, whether we agree with everything or not. Because, we all have this agenda that we would love God to follow. We have a script that we'd like him to play out, but he's not a genie in a bottle,
No.
and we're part of his plan. And he's such a good God and he loves us so much that he has a beautiful place for us in that plan. And he has incredibly joyful, exciting, and fulfilling things that he wants us to walk out in life. And we live in this fallen world with this spiritual enemy who comes to steal,
Well,
kill, and destroy.
and we also live with other people with free will
Mm-hmm.
who get to say and do things that might not be healthy or helpful or
Right.
good. And they get free will the same way you get free will. And free will is important to God. And there's consequences to the choices people make.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And sometimes they have consequences in your life, the choices that people make. And so that's another thing we just have to keep in mind is
Right.
sometimes this is based on someone else's choices. Like we talked, I believe last week about somebody might throw some garbage in your yard.
Mm-hmm.
And is that fair? Oh, of course not. Is it good? Absolutely not. Might it have been downright evil? Yeah, there's a chance. But if you don't want to live with garbage and rotting in your front yard, making everything worse, you have to go pick it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of this too, is people get to make choices. And sometimes those choices are horrible and we get brushed up against with those choices or smashed down by those choices.
Right. There's a great book that I
Mhm.
can recommend to you that will help you regain perspective, because
Mhm.
it's not until we can step back and look at a bigger picture will some things start to make sense.
Mhm.
That did God cause these things? Absolutely not.
Mhm.
So then the next question is, why did he allow it? Because God is always in control. But what if there's a bigger picture at play and we only see this little slice of the bell curve, this little
Mhm.
tiny slice down here in the weeds that we're looking at, and we need to get up above the trees? Because now I've had some perspective, because I've had a lifetime of dealing with various types of narcissists. And I don't say that just because there's a narcissist under every bush. Like, knowing what I know now, I can look back and see. And for a while, I wrestled with that. And I would go to him with the why questions, like, why? And my question was not so much like, why did you allow this, but what's wrong with me? That narcissist after narcissist, like, sought me out. Like, what was going on with that? Well, now look at what I get to do. Look at my whole business is wrapped around helping women move through this. And so what I went through was hard, but you know what? God got me through it. And I have a good life that I love now, and I'm happy and I'm at peace. And I get to invest my days helping other women grow. So what Satan meant for evil, God uses for good. And that is the ultimate victory, the ultimate victory. And so I've reached this place, and this might sound really weird, but I can actually be grateful for things that I've been through, because it equipped me to be able to do something else. So these things we go through, when we look for it, there's silver linings in the middle of all this. But we won't get to that place until we come up out of the weeds and start to turn toward God. When we turn away from him and hold our heart apart from him, that leads to more problems. That lets Satan get in there and attack and get his hooks in. And that leads to strongholds being developed. The only path that helps us is to press toward him instead. And that's what we want to challenge you about today, even if you don't understand.
And we know that's not necessarily easy.
Yeah.
So we are just being very practical
Mm-hmm.
and very, in some ways, surfacey. But we do know that that does work.
So we're so glad that you joined us this week. Hope this has been helpful to you. And we invite you to join us again next week as we talk about how to face leftover fears still lurking in your mind. So we're going to press into some of these 5 symptoms and the assumptions we talked a little bit more, unpack it another layer deeper to take a look at these fears and how do we go about facing those. Hey, remember, we do encourage you to partner with God. Expect to see him do immeasurably more than you asked or hoped for. That might not be overnight, but over time, you'll be able to look back, just like what I described to you, that I get to do now. Look back and see God really has done immeasurably more than I asked or hoped for. And we're just getting started. I'm sure, Wendy, you've got lots of stories that you could say along those lines too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyone who's walked with God for a while has walked not just on top of the mountain, but in the valley.
That's
and
right.
they felt like they were doing it alone. So
It's just part of it.
yeah.
So we're with you. We know you're walking this journey, and we want to help you, to give you some guidance, some wisdom. We're going to challenge you to grow, because we know that if you just take 1% and you just focus on being 1% better than you were yesterday, than you were last week, that where that's going to go is something that is better than you could even imagine. So be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode to help others. Remember, you'll find some links to some helpful resources in the description. And you can also reach out to us via email at hello@AnnetteChesney.com. Got some questions you want to ask or something you want to share with us. So remember, keep going, because your best is yet to come. We'll see you next week.